So my name is Ivy Powers, and I will be moderating the panel today. I'm originally from a small town in New Hampshire, but today I'm actually recording here from Cambridge, Massachusetts at my apartment. So a little bit about myself. I come from a background of sales, customer loyalty programs, and customer success. But today's not really about me. It's actually about our three awesome panelists here today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. So as many of you know, I just wanted to give a high-level overview of what this talk is all about today. So as some of you may have actually already experienced firsthand, oftentimes the sales force of the company kind of gets the glory in a lot of organizations. But account managers and customer success managers are really the unsung heroes that truly drive growth, especially as it's a newer position kind of in the world of business, but it's a very important position. So according to a survey by Invesp, increasing customer retention by only 5% can actually increase company profits anywhere from 25 to 95%, depending on the size of your company here. So I think it's super important, the number one job of customer success is to support customers and having a remarkable experience with your product. That's what it's all about, right? So the reward of their efforts is that you retain revenue and drive upsell. So this panel is really going to deep dive on how you can help build the muscle for retaining and increasing revenue for your startup. And so again, we're lucky to have three awesome panelists here who are experts on this topic in the world of startups, especially right here in Boston. So here we have Jonas Dinkna. He's a product manager at Parler. We have David Henriquez. He's a team lead for sales engineering at Klaviyo. And then we have Erica Ayo, who's the VP of customer success at Privy. So they come from a wide range of backgrounds, so I'm excited for you guys to hear a little bit more about that. So before we get started with the topic and the questions at hand, I want to hand it over, actually starting with Jonas, and then I'll go to Erica and David. Could you guys give us just like a 1-minute introduction of who you are and what your current role entails?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Ivy. My name's Jonas Dinkna. I'm a product manager at Parler. Previous to getting into the product management field, I actually worked in customer support and some other customer-facing roles like account management. So this is a topic that's really near and dear to me. So I was the first product manager at Parler, the first non-founder hire. So I've been, working very closely and kind of building the product up. And now that we have customers really focused on keeping them engaged, driving customer retention, figuring out exactly what it takes to, derive value from our product. So really closely involved with our customers as a PM, and really excited to talk about, kind of the deep synergies between product and customer success and all the things that your company could benefit from by kind of trying to focusing on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. And Erica, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ivy. Really excited to be here, and I love the topic. Can't wait to get into it. My name's Erica Ayat. Like Ivy said, I'm the VP of Customer Success and Support at Privy. If you don't know who Privy is or what we do, we help small e-commerce businesses sell more online with their web conversion, email, and text tools. I've been at Privy for almost 3 years. When I started, I think I was a customer. I was employee lucky number 13, and now we're about 60 strong. My team has about 23 folks. So it's definitely been a lot of growth in the last couple of years. Before I was at Privy, I've been in startups and in tech for about 16 years. And I loved how Party said that this was for the startup curious, because I've been in it for a long time and I'm still startup curious. I started off as a marketer for about 10 years, made a short detour through sales. And about 6 years ago, I came to customer success. So again, really excited to be here and to get the conversation started.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. Thank you, Ivy, for hosting the panel, and really excited for the topic here. Myself, I started off really young, interested in computer science, software engineering, and then ended up in tech sales for about 8 years after college. And then over the last 3 years, I've converted back into engineering. So I work at Klaviyo. Klaviyo is one of the fastest growing startups in Boston. I was employee around 100. We're around 500 strong now and looking to more than double that. So if anyone watching is interested, feel free to reach out after this. The team at Klaviyo is really dynamic. And over the last few years, my role has been basically 50% integration engineering. So you could think of me as kind of like a back-end software engineer working on integration between different systems, and then 50% really doing whatever it takes to help prospects and customers be able to be successful on the platform. So over the last few years, we've had to do a lot of things in order to help bend what you might traditionally think of as a Klaviyo customer or traditional use cases for Klaviyo. And myself and my team are very involved in trying to make sure that customers are able to get that flexibility and they're able to use the tool well. So customer success is something that's critical to us in any SaaS company. So definitely really excited for this panel today.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much, panelists, for the intro here. So 2 things before we get started with some of the questions about the topic. So first and foremost, we actually have a poll that we're going to send out in the Zoom webinar chat right now. It's just a question of like, which type of company are you? Where are you kind of tuning in from? It's great for us to be able to get a pulse on who's kind of checking in here. So feel free to choose which type of company you are. Parties, do we want to keep this open for a few minutes?
I'll give it to you. I'll give you everyone 30 seconds. We have 72%. Ooh, we're at 80% voted now. All right, guys, you have 2 more seconds. Tell us who you are. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're closing it. And now I'm going to show everybody. There we go.
Awesome.
Sweet. All right, I will now disappear and you guys can continue.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So for the rest of the panel today, folks, what I'm going to try to do is keep this a little bit more conversational than just a Q&A style. I understand that usually these panels are much more fun in person, but in this virtual world we're living in, we're gonna make the best with what we have. So to make this, as exciting and engaging as possible, it's going to be more of a conversation kind of between all the panelists. But again, I want you guys to remember the Slido link that's here in the chat. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to post them in there. I'm kind of going to be doing both on my end, checking out which questions are coming in, but also kind of staying on track with the panelists. So if I don't get to your question right away, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance, but I will try my best to kind of circle back every once in a while to check in. So awesome. If that sounds all good, let's really get going here. So the first question that we wanted to really deep dive into here is how to upsell and cross-sell the strategy decided on at your company. So how do you build more features that can be sold as an upsell or a cross-sell? So we'll start here with Jonas. Do you want to go ahead and take away with this one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think before you even think about upselling or cross-selling your customers, you really have to understand what it is that makes your customers tick and what's the value that they're really going to derive from your product. And to start that process, I think it's really important that you start off with a really solid customer onboarding and education process. That's something that at Parler, we kind of spend a lot of time on. And the reason I think that's important is so that you set your customers up for success. Secondly, I think it's really important that you reduce the time to value for your customers, making sure that they're able to get to that kind of aha moment as quickly as possible so that they, continue to use it and come back. And that third part is making it, a habit forming product. And a lot of that comes through, making it as easy as possible for them to use. So once you're able to do those things, you can think about exactly how you can improve your product. And a lot of that's going to come directly through customer feedback. So I think understanding exactly how your customers are using the product and continuing to kind of evaluate their usage by, surveying them and speaking directly with them in particular As a product person, it's really important for us to communicate with the customer facing folks. So that might be folks who are on the sales process and customer success, which is, kind of underneath the product team. And that's super important because communicating the things that the customer facing folks are hearing back to the product team allows us to really quickly spin up new features that we think are going to, continue to impress those customers, not only retain them, but potentially upsell them or cross-sell them within our existing products. So I think, creating a process that, really ties your customer support or customer facing folks into the product team so that there's constant communication will allow you to always know what the market's looking for, what your existing customers are looking for. So you could feed that into your product development process and then eventually know exactly how you can upsell or cross-sell those folks.
Awesome. Yeah. And absolutely, I know from my own experience, the aha moment is kind of that first milestone in terms of even being able to implement the upsell or cross-sell strategy. So that's a really great point. Erica, do you want to go ahead and give your perspective on this?
Yeah, sure. So Jonas, it was really great for you to highlight, working with customer success. As a customer success person, the best thing that we can do is work with a product team that not only accepts, but is super hungry for direct customer feedback. And, I also liked how you said that you were surveying customers and taking their feedback directly as well, because I think sometimes we being tech folks think that we know better than our customers. A quick story, I was at an industry dinner earlier this year in the before times, and a longtime VC had asked the group of this customer success leaders, do you ask your customers directly, what do they want? Like, do you survey them and then build it? And hardly anyone could raise their hands. And he proceeded to tell us how a long time ago, like in the 90s, that's what they did in development. And not that I'm advocating wholly for that type of strategy, just, taking it directly from the customer unmitigated. You can get a lot of tail wagging the dog in that regard. But I do think in some cases, we've overcomplicated this process of feedback, and maybe in some instances, let our own hubris get in the way, like we know better than you, when really it could be very simple.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that as well in terms of co-creation alongside your customers. That's something that is so helpful, especially if you're working with customers that are from an industry that you're not so familiar with. I mean, it's really, really important to know, how they're approaching, how they're feeling about things, how they're feeling about the product, and how you can kind of help assist them to feel successful there. That's super important. So that's great. Are there any, and this is a little building off of that, did you guys find that from your experience, your strategy changed over time because of what you've learned, depending on the industries that you're working alongside of?
Yeah, so I definitely think a lot of it can change based on industry and who you're working with. One thing I wanted to add from the previous discussion, I think Erica and Jonas did a great job giving the perspective from product and CS and working together and everything. I think one other thing to think about in terms of upselling is ultimately it's going to, at the end of the day, be a go-to-market strategy and a sales strategy. And I think from that perspective, what I'd like to share is this isn't going to be true in every circumstance, but largely I think you want to try and design a good upsell program where, as Jonas said, it's based on the customers using the product more. So Privy and Klaviyo are both fortunate in that our business models are the more the success the customer has, the more they're going to be using our product. Therefore, the larger they're going to grow, they're going to end up paying more, and it becomes a very natural process. CSMs really do not and it's not always the skill set that they're trying to develop, having to upsell their customers. And at the same time, it's a lot of friction when a customer really wants something, but then you tell them afterwards, okay, well, we'll do it, but here's what you have to pay for it. And then they really want to do something else, and okay, well, we could do that too, but we want to pay for it. It's kind of like the anti-startup model. Like if you think of someone like Oracle, right? Like they sell to you with lawyers and line items, and they audit your licenses, and they try and come after you for every little thing. And that's a really tough thing for a customer. They feel like, okay, we're forced to use Oracle, so we're stuck with them, right? But they hate them as a vendor. As a startup, you want your customers to love you. And so developing a strategy where as your customers do better, they use the product better, kind of like the AWS approach, where AWS starts off really cheap for some EC2 instances, and before you know it, you're using IAM roles and you're setting up a lot of different services, and you have a managed database. And now as you're doing better and your infrastructure is more successful and you're a more successful company, they're getting more from you. And so I think if you're looking at an upsell strategy, trying to make it as natural for your customers as possible, as they're successful, that you're going to be successful. It's not easy to do, but if you can figure out a good way to do that, you're going to have a much better time than having your CSMs have to upsell and constantly look for ways to, like, could we charge more for this? Or are some industries willing to pay more for this? Or some not? Because it becomes very on a one-off basis. And I feel like I'm going very long with this answer, but basically, sometimes people will buy for crazy reasons. They may have one thing that's like, that's the reason they're purchasing. And on the inside that every vendor solution does the same thing they want, but for some reason they're just like gung-ho about that feature with you. Well, just because they love that feature and they would be willing to spend 10x what you're charging for it, doesn't mean that your whole base of customers would. So sometimes when one customer is telling you, I really want to pay more for this product or this feature, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to want that. So having some kind of natural progression where they can pay more on their own is super helpful if you can get that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And I think that highlights even further the importance of customer success managers, because they're the pros in terms of communicating with their customers and kind of reading between the lines of what's going to be most helpful, what could be put on the back burner for now, because oftentimes startups, especially really small ones that are really just getting off the ground, they're kind of building things on the fly sometimes for customers, especially if they only have their first few under their belt. And so it's a little bit of a trial and error of like, okay, what are we going to build for this customer overnight, essentially? But that's the fun of startups, right? Is really digging deep into the problems that their customers are having, and not just giving like a blanket solution for every customer. So yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Erica, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you could sense, right? I was like, I think it's a proof point of how well you're listening to your customers, right? Yeah. If you're not improving on the right things or building features or products that aren't solving real problems, then the problem is that you don't know who your customers are. And I really liked the point that David brought up about it being natural, right? If you improve upon your existing product, you create the conditions where upselling becomes natural and cross-selling new products becomes much easier. I like to think of success and retention as just sales on a different timeline, right? It's human nature to become habituated to something. So if you're not continuously improving, you're leaving an opportunity for the competition to catch up or surpass you. So, and I do think that there's a balance between, you never want to build a set of features for one customer. I don't care how big they are, unless you're really small and just getting started. Oftentimes you do that, but you do have to take the greater profile of the customer into consideration as well, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Working smarter, not harder, right? Well, awesome. So we actually have a really great question that came in from Slido here. And this can go to any of the panelists here, but have you mapped your customer journey? And if yes, do you measure points along this journey to indicate success? And then there's a third part of the question is, what methods and measurements do you use? So does anybody have any insight on that in terms of mapping your customer journey?
I can take that one.
Sure.
In terms of mapping that, we didn't use any fancy tools. I know that there's software that you can use to do that, but I think especially when you're starting out, we just use a spreadsheet, to be honest with you. Or actually, I like starting with whiteboarding, because when you're first doing it, there's a lot of, back and forth, and you want to be able to erase easily. And so honestly, just using a spreadsheet, using some really basic tools. In terms of points, we don't necessarily use points, but we do measure success from a customer perspective. I think one mistake that some companies make is that they make their health scoring or their point system based on what your company wants the customer to do, like their milestones, as opposed to what success looks like for your customer. And I think that you can force some behaviors, and that's when you don't get a very good fit between your customer journey and your actual customers. So making sure that you're tracking those milestones and whatever point system that you're using to what success looks like for your customers, and understanding that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the milestones that you are checking in on, how do you go about doing that? Are they customer interviews? Are they polls that are sent out, surveys, or anything else?
Yeah, for us, it's a couple of different things. It's product usage, but also for us, like, we can see, you know, if they're being successful, if they are, you know, building up their contact list, are they increasing their sales? Those are sort of the endpoints that customers really care about. I mean, at the end of the day, am I making money? Am I making more money by using your tool? And if you can measure that and say, like, hey, you know what, you're on track, or you're not, or you're where we would expect you to be, or you're not, you know, that's a very direct value proposition to the customer, right? Like, that's very much in the customer mindset, versus like, oh, we need to make sure we get you through this activation flow. Did you complete all the bullet points?
Right.
That's not customer centric.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would add to that, I mean, obviously, Erica has way more context on that, and she isn't responsible for this. At, you know, my company, we have a whole customer success team that has very detailed, mapped out steps. But I think the one thing I can add of insight is that at Klaviyo, we have a lot of this, but for a long time, customer success was a bit more rudimentary. It was much more of the CSM and the relationship with the customer, and there wasn't this large, not say large scale, but there wasn't as much organization as a company around this. But one thing that's you can do, even if you're in startup mode, and even if you don't have the time to like map everything out and you're focused on other things, is setting up the telemetrics and tracking those things from day one. So little things like when a new customer signs up, when a customer logs in, if a customer hasn't logged in and used the app over, you know, X amount of time, a report that generates a list of those folks. Like, anything you can do when building an app that allows you to track how people are using it. You may not use all of it on day one, but as you grow, as you start bringing in, you know, someone like an Erica, like a VP of success, like, people are going to need data. They're going to need things to do. And historically, you may not have done it. It gets really difficult if at the last minute you're like, all right, now we're going to start tracking everything, and you don't have anything to compare it to over time. So little things you can do on day one to just set up some reporting, set up some tracking, and even if like not all of it works, at least you can figure it out over time to have some idea of like the direction your customers are going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really, really great point. I think early and often getting those success measurements are super important. I love the quote, you can't manage what you can't measure. So once you get those measurements in place, you then can start to figure out, you know, which path you need to take from there, which is super important. So I'm actually going to hop this question over to Jonas now. How has your customer retention feature roadmap and upsell strategies shifted as your company has grown?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of a product person at an early stage startup. I hope that's okay. In our case, the product folks are actually more customer facing than most. I'm involved in conversations with customers just about every day, so I'm privy to these conversations, thankfully. So in particular, like for customer retention, early at Parler, we were really focused on user retention because in Parler we were dealing with individuals who are using our product, and in many cases like a customer success leader or a product manager who is using our tool individually to kind of improve their workflows and processes. So this is kind of differentiated from customer retention because you're less focused on the account, more focused on the individual and their kind of product usage and adoption metrics. But as we've grown, having to shift over to focusing on customer retention because companies are implementing Parler within their own internal workflows has kind of forced us to focus more on like thinking about the long-term value of Parler and how it can fit in within their company and how it's kind of impacting their and how it's impacting. Maybe mute them.
Oh, I can go. I have an office too, so I can go in the office if you want me to. No, I'm not on video.
Hey, Pardees. I think you may not be on mute. Okay, go ahead, Jonas.
Sign of our times.
How many times has that happened in the last 6 months?
Yeah, formality is out the window now.
Yeah.
So long story short there, I think it's really important to make sure that your product's value is inherent to the company and their workflows, and you're going to figure that out through constant communication with them. So setting up these, monthly business reviews to better understand how the specific account is using your product and how you can improve the way that they're, trying to extract value from your product is super important. And when you're working with fewer customers, you're allowed to, really dive deep and kind of provide that high touch service to those folks. And I think that's really important when you're at an earlier stage. In terms of the roadmap, so we can focus a little bit less on the customer requests and focus more holistically on addressing specific user needs that have the greatest impact on, our business in general. So a little bit about Parler. We're a feedback management system, and it's really designed to optimize the entire feedback lifecycle. So we're really able to use our own tool to better understand how our customers are, benefiting from using Parler, and, in the cases where they have feedback, exactly, how important addressing that feedback is to us. And that has a direct impact on our roadmap. So, with using Parler within, our own context, we're able to understand exactly who feedback is coming from and how it's kind of relevant to our business goals or product strategy in the moment. And so I think it's really important that, if you don't have a tool like Parler, that you're at least thinking about, as you grow, what are the things that, perhaps this quarter you're trying to improve? Like if it's churn reduction in particular, are you able to look at the feedback that's coming from customers who are likely to churn in the next, 60 days based on their most recent NPS survey? So like if you have the tools or the process in place to really filter through the feedback that you've collected and understand how addressing that feedback might impact your roadmap, you'll really make sure that you're focusing on the right things. And I think that's important as you grow when you can't really focus on individual customer, customization requests and have to think a little more holistically. Yeah, I'll stop there and let somebody else speak.
I was going to say, to your point, not all feedback is created equal, right? Mm-hmm. And I think especially when you're early stage, you're really still figuring that out. You're figuring out like who your ideal customer is, and the retention aspect, the feature roadmap, the upsell, all of these things are interconnected, and they're not they all impact each other. And as you're growing, you start to figure out like, okay, like, we think this is our customer base, but you could actually shift that perspective as the company grows, as you figure out where your sweet spot is technically, as you may go in with one idea and come out with another. And I think that's pretty common in startup land. And that can shift over time if you're, I think we represent 3 different stages of growth here, like early, mid, and I mean, I guess I could classify Klaviyo as a little bit later just because you guys are so big now. But yeah, I mean, like making sure that you're not only collecting that feedback, but classifying it in a way that you can make business decisions, and really focusing. You can't serve all, you really have to hone in on who your profile is and go deep there as opposed to going broad, because you just can't, possibly satisfy everyone. That's how you end up with a sort of experience instead of a focused one.
Sure. Yeah. And that could be too overwhelming, if it's not super focused. And yeah, that's a really great point. And Erica, do you actually have an example of when, like you and your team of customer success has worked with product really closely to generate new types of revenue streams?
Yeah, of course. I mean, from what I understand, with there can be a lot of pressure from VCs and just in general to really grow at any cost and extract that incremental spend from an existing audiences can be very tempting. But it can also be super distracting to an organization if you're not introducing that new revenue stream or that new product at the right time. And often it can come at the expense of the core product. And just to, usually your secondary product will be a fraction of that existing revenue for a very long time, or a fraction of the core product revenue. So I would say, I think sometimes startups' eyes get a little bit bigger than their stomachs, so to speak. And I think that they should approach building new revenue streams carefully to do it for real. I think, just keeping in mind that you have to uniquely solve an actual customer problem that they're willing to, pay real cash money to resolve is something to keep in mind. The customer really has to get it, and it has to be drop dead obvious. So I think, coming back to your direct question there, making sure that there's value for the customer, right? And, working with those teams to say, hey, you know what, like they like, 1, 2, 3 in the product, but you know what their real big pain point is? It's, 4, 5, and 6. And just making sure that, as you're building those additional revenue streams, that you're building something that's sticky and solves an actual problem that people are willing to pay for.
Absolutely. Awesome. I think that's some really great insight. And to actually build on top of that, we have a question here in Slido that I'll read. Do you have any experience creating customer success strategies for a business that doesn't have a simple product? And so, for example, a company that sells physical products as well as services associated with these products, which would vary based on the project scope. So does anybody have any insight there?
Go ahead, you can start. Yeah, so what was, I want to answer, what was the beginning of the question again? Sorry, because.
Yeah. So do you have any experience creating customer success strategies for a business that doesn't have a simple product? So for example,
okay, I got you.
Physical,
yeah. So I wanted to just make sure I answered it correctly. Yeah. So I spent 3.5 years at an agency where Pardis and I actually met. She was one of my clients. I think technically the VP of marketing was my client, and me and Pardis were kind of like coworkers, where I was in the agency and she was at the client, and it was awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And so in that world, what we did was essentially we built Drupal websites. We hosted on Acquia, so there was like a combination with Acquia. We provided a subscription model, which is kind of weird for a agency. And so I think Pardis and CloudHealth were one of the first like 5 customers that we got on this new subscription model. And so what we did there was we essentially, it wasn't exactly a project model. Well, there were projects. It was essentially doing website development, doing website maintenance, working with their marketing tools to make it more effective for their website. Typical like lead gen optimization, right? That you'd hire an agency for as like a growing startup. CloudHealth had raised 30 million. It was like phase they needed to increase that, hire an agency, that just kind of standard thing. So what we did was we created a system where each quarter you would have access to our resources, and we would look at every quarter trying to do a couple like high level projects, things for like good visibility so that leadership had like some good things to point to see we're successful, and then just like a smaller bucket that we would use for just maintenance and ongoing little things. And I think in that kind of context where there's like a project work being done, or like there's these kind of like milestones that are a little bit off of the standard like SaaS model, what you really need to do in situations like that as a startup is you need to do kind of like the glitz and glam part of these milestones. Like you need to make sure that even though they're little things and they're just kind of incremental things you might be doing over time, you have kind of like celebrations whenever you have a win with that customer. You set yourself up for these celebrations by having like, hey, this is quarter, this is the project we're going to work on, or this is the thing we're going to do this month. And then when it's done, you need to celebrate it. You need to get feedback from that customer, and then you need to tell that story so that you get other customers. So in that regard, I think that really what you want to try and do is hit a lot of high notes on those cool projects so that you can share, so that you can brag about it. It sounds cool, but just make sure that the not sexy work is like still getting done under the covers, and you have like a good method of being able to handle both of those.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think the job, right, is to figure out what does your customer value and how do you get them there as quickly as possible. And for me, one of the reasons I love working at Privy is because that value is really easy to calculate. It's probably, you know, one of the easier ROI calculations I've had to do in my career, but that's not the case in most products or in every product. So I think validating what success looks like to your customers along the way is super important, and repeating it back to them, whether that's in a customer success conversation, whether that's in product, whether that's via marketing automation, tech touch, whatever it is, just making sure that like they are agreeing like, hey, you know what, this is what success looks like. And yes, we've reached first milestone. Yes, we've reached second. And making sure that even if the ROI calculation is you know, difficult to get to if you have a product like that, just making sure that you're a day-to-day or a weekly part of what your customer is doing and making it sticky from that perspective, I think is really important. I mean, no one ever asks or questions the usefulness of, say, like your Google Analytics implementation, right? But you can't do a direct ROI calculation there. So yeah, so I think it's all about understanding what your customer values and figuring out how to get them there fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can thank you, Erica. I missed that whole part of what I was saying, but I should have added that detail. Basically, in the case of Cloud Health, with parties, one of the big things we did is we redesigned one of their core landing pages on their website, and we said like, hey, when this is done, we're going to increase the conversion percentage, and this is what we're going for. And then we hit it, and then exactly we showed it to them. So having that agreement up front of like, hey, this is what the project's going to be, and then that allowed us to be able to be successful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I just wanted to chime in on the product side of that, you know, dealing with complex products and kind of how it impacts or its relation to customer success. You know, like I like thinking about TurboTax as one of those complex products because I don't think anybody would say it's super easy to use. Like my parents still go into H&R Block, like they're not signing in using TurboTax. But I think the fact that TurboTax is still much easier than the old way of doing things for the majority of people is why they're super successful. And I think that's, you know, very similar with most products is, you know, the goal should be to, you know, not provide, you know, you want to give them great customer support and, you know, that should drive loyalty. But the thing that most closely correlates with customer loyalty is like product effort. So if you make your product as effortless as possible for them to use, then they'll come back and continue using it. And that's what makes them happy, not the fact that you give them a coupon or discounts or are really nice in the live chat. So I think, you know, trying to make sure that your customer success organization is built around collecting feedback that's meant to drive, you know, a reduction in product effort, you know, making sure that you're communicating that back to the product team so they can, you know, build a product that's as effortless as possible is something that should definitely be a priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know for product teams, or at least a startup that I've worked at before, what they do is focus around this emotional design aspect of like, if they're enjoying their experience, if it was easy, if they didn't get frustrated, I mean, that is a huge telltale sign of if they're going to have success with your product or not. Because I know all of us have probably experienced some kind of platform at some point in our lives that was really frustrating to use, and it's hard to go back to it because we know what our experience is going to be like, right? So when it's a good experience, it's easy, yeah, as little effort as possible, as Jonas mentioned, that is totally a game changer right there. And so to pivot this next question over to David here, when is the best time for a startup to think about adding a new revenue stream?
Yeah, so I think the simple answer to this is once you have your current revenue stream in a very mature place. And I think that right there is like the key to it. We can speak a lot more about that, like what it means to have it in a mature place. But one of the biggest issues with startups in general is you're kind of balancing a lot of different forces, and you may not even have product market fit yet in your mind. You have some customers, things are going well. You don't know though, like what is your market potential yet? You're not quite, set on your product even. And when you're in a circumstance like that, you can get dragged in a lot of different directions, and you can think, wow, this might be a huge opportunity to like upcharge this product over here, or to like build this thing, and then we can charge everyone for it. And you can get pulled in a lot of situations, and it can be a very emotional thing when you think about like the growth of your company and the success of your business and adding revenue, and like obviously revenue can really help grow, and you can have new divisions, and like you can get really excited easily. But I think you have to, in almost all circumstances, avoid as much of that as possible. Try and figure out what the one thing is that you're going to do better than anyone else, and execute on that. And then once that is good, and once you're confident that that business unit or that core part of your business is successful, only then should you be looking at other revenue streams. And honestly, you shouldn't even really probably be a startup anymore by the time that's happening. Like you should be a growth stage company. You should have like $50-100 million in funding, if you're looking at a broad, like big market opportunity, because you should be able to get a successful, like if you're a traditional, VC path startup, trying to generate a huge type of company, you're going to have to do that in one core set of expertise. You're not going to want to spread yourself too thin too early. Later on, if like the market opportunity in your main product is limited, and you need to expand and you need to try other things, like that's absolutely a good idea. But at first, I really think it's the death of so many companies to try and do too much at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Erica, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, David, I wanted to stand up and cheer because I could not agree more with that. I have seen, this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen in my personal experience that startups make, is that they try to build that second product way too early, and it becomes a massive distraction and resource suck. So yeah, I would just wholeheartedly agree with what David said. Do one thing, do it well. As the wisdom says, don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing, and just make sure that you build something before before getting distracted with something that may not be a great fit or you don't have the resources to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense here. And one quick question that we have here from Slido that I want to ask, because I think this will resonate with a lot of people in terms of management, but how do we train, or how do you train new customer success employees, especially ones that are new to startups or, the workforce in general? How do you train them to identify and explore revenue opportunities with customers?
I suppose I could take that one.
Yeah.
we do that day to day. So I think it really it starts with the hire first, and the biggest thing that can help that, not only just from an upsell perspective, but also from a retention perspective, is hiring folks who have some practical experience in the realm or in the field that your product is working in or looking to sell. So for example, over on our side at Privy, a lot of the folks, or almost all the folks that we've hired in CS, have had hands-on marketing roles before, or hands-on e-commerce roles. And so that means that when they are working with their customers, they have that practical experience to be able to make really real suggestions and to be able to make connections that you can't necessarily train every single person in your org to be able to make. They have the background and they have the capacity to make those connections. And I think, when you're thinking about, upsell opportunities, if you have folks who understand the ecosystem, understand the field, understand the technology really well, because I think this is one thing that some CS folks don't do well, is that they don't know the product technically well enough. And I think that's a huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
Then they're better able to recognize those opportunities, and it's natural, right? Like I said before, I think CS is sales on a different timeline. And if you have the folks who can recognize those opportunities and, just understand who they're working with and why they care about it, those will become natural over time. I think if you have that, the thing that you then have to do is making sure that you're empowering those folks to suggest, right, to make the sale. I think that's the biggest hurdle, because a lot of times CS folks will focus on the relationship part and get uncomfortable within those sales conversations. So from a practical perspective, I would say, like, do some teach backs with your sales team. Have the sales team teach the CS team how to close, or, give them some tips on how to do that. And just saying that, like, hey, you know what, like, maybe you don't have a quota on the CS side, but maybe there's a spiff. And I think that's, in my view, that's the right way to incentivize new revenue over on the CS side of the house.
Yeah.
One other thing I think you can do too, sorry there, but, and this only works at slightly larger scale. Like if you're dealing with super SMBs, this isn't going to work as well, but there's nothing wrong with keeping the salesperson attached to the account. Salesforce does this historically, right? With the Sales Cloud, you sign up as a startup, you got 10 seats, you need to add 10 more seats. You're talking to that original salesperson again, and CS is completely separate from that oftentimes. And a lot of companies do that model. It's hard to do at the really small level, because you just, as a salesperson, you need them focused on new business and getting new people in the door. They don't have time to continually work with the herd. But if it's a slightly larger sale, then it absolutely makes sense to allow that salesperson to continue following on that deal. And again, it helps the natural conversation where the CSM is kind of like their friend, and you got the evil sales guy who comes in to try and sell them. And it's not really like that, but it helps your CS person have a really good relationship and not have to get out of their comfort zone. And again, that just might not be something that they're interested in. Like, we have some awesome CSMs at Klaviyo, and I know some that have even had sales backgrounds before, and that's just not really what they're interested in anymore. They want to help the customer. They want to help them use the product. They want to help them get the most value out of it. They're not necessarily, wanting to be concerned with upselling them, but they're more than happy to see an opportunity and say, hey, let me tag in this person, and next call we have with them, let's, talk about this opportunity. They can tee it up just like a BDR would for a new account. The CSM can tee it up for an AE with the existing account. You can have a really successful outcome there.
Absolutely. And I think for customer success managers, at least from my experience, it's more about being an advocate for your customers rather than so much selling to them. Although that sales part is important, but exactly what you just mentioned, David. I mean, Salesforce does a good job of that, of being able to connect, two different employees on an account, so that I don't know if this is the right term to go about it, but it's one way to look at it in terms of like good cop, bad cop. Like, you have your advocates, but then you also have the people that at the end of the day, you still need to make a sale, right? And like, that's what they're good at. So they're going to bring those skills to the table. So yeah. And also, just to recap what Erica said, again, from my own personal experience, being someone who didn't have a ton of experience in startups before working as a customer success manager, experience with the product, like just playing around with it in your free time and doing things on your own with it, instead of asking an employee who knows the product better than you questions about it. Just figure it out on your own. I think that's the best way to train your employees, is just give them time to play around with it and answer their own questions, even though it may take a little bit longer. It's going to pay off in the long run, absolutely. And it'll empower them to kind of continue their education there. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to hop over to Jonas now to ask for another question here. Can you tell a story about a time that a customer gave negative feedback and you went above and beyond from either a service or product perspective to really turn their experience around?
Yeah, fortunately, not too many in my experience so far at Parler, but one in particular actually came up from our first legit customer. So I think that most people know that first customer is a really unique case. And a lot of cases, your first customer is using a product that may have been sold on prematurely, and in a lot of cases also is acting almost like a beta customer. So some of this might be expected, but in their case, there was some functionality that we had kind of expected to have ready on time for their start date that wasn't quite ready, and upon realizing that, was clearly a little frustrated. And as a result, like it came down to providing a personal, high touch level of support for that person. And in a lot of cases, I think that, it requires that, technical support or a product manager working closely with whoever the person you're selling to, in order to make sure that you're able to get them to, the desired outcome. And in our case, it required manually working with them to do on the back end what was required, for the desired outcome. And in the end, there's some frustration, but at the same time, they understand that being the first customer, things like this come with it. And I think it's more about your kind of how you react, and if we were to react kind of passively and try and wait until the feature was ready, rather than find a workaround and put in hours overtime working long at night to do this manually, then they might not have been nearly as happy with the outcome. But in the end, they're still a customer. We followed up, kind of adding additional months to their subscription, as a thank you and a sorry at the same time for dealing with that. And to this day, they're our most active customer. We continue to treat them like a VIP customer, and I think that was part of what they signed up for. With the understanding that being that first customer, there might be some hiccups, but that allows us to kind of build the product kind of in their vision in a lot of that case, and make sure that we're building a product that they find inherently valuable. And as a result, we kind of both win. They're getting a tool that is kind of being custom built almost for them, or at least with them in mind, but at the same time helping us learn from those sorts of situations and get better.
Totally. And those experiences are inevitable at startups. So you're going to run into something where you're like, all right, I guess the next 2 nights we're staying up all night to manually enter in whatever data. It's not enjoyable, but again, it's I think when people get negative feedback, especially startups, that they get so nervous and anxious and what's going to happen. But one thing to remember is it's not ideal, but that is the biggest opportunity to wow them. That is the opportunity to then come back and say, look what we just did for you. We're dedicated, we're loyal. And the people that end up being, the biggest critics of products, I tend to see, end up being your biggest champions and loyalists as well, because they see the work that goes into it, and they then become a part of this co-creation process where they're pushing you to get outside your comfort zone and your limits to improve. So absolutely, yeah, negative experiences with the product can be a huge opportunity to wow your customers and really delight them.
Yeah,
Erica, you want to mention something?
I totally agree with that, Ivy. I mean, invariably, the customer, if you can come out the other side, those customers tend to be your strongest customers.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the psychology of folks who go through a traumatic event together, and then they end up being very bonded afterwards. If you can make that happen, and like you said, not be defensive and just try and work through it and do right by the customer, they're gonna be able to feel and see the effort that you put in. And if you can solve their issue at the end of the day, they're going to be that much more appreciative of it. So don't be afraid. I would say don't get defensive, just do your best. And it's not going to work out in every single instance, but the ones that do, you're going to be bonded, and they're going to be that much more appreciative.
Yeah, I would say it's so easy to want to hide. It's so easy to want to say, okay, we're working on it, and then disappear. Over communicate. Give them FaceTime. It used to be, right, if they're a huge customer, get on a plane. You can't really do that anymore. But get in front of them. Give them the ability to speak to an executive. Let them vent. Just give them the time they want. If it seems like you're hiding, if it seems like you're, trying to brush the problem away, it's going to make everything worse. And you just need to deal with it up front. And if they're emotional, let them be emotional. Don't be emotional back. Just let people vent, let them get the emotions out, and then get through it together.
Totally. Yeah. People just want to be heard. At the end of the day, I think what's important to someone, they just want to be heard about that. So awesome. So we have 4 minutes left here. I'm going to do one more question from Slido, and then I'm actually going to pass it back over to Pardis, who's going to wrap everything up for us. But speaking of not being able to get on planes anymore, I knew this question was going to be coming, but what COVID-specific challenges are you folks all now facing working at a startup in the current day right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I can provide some brief background here for me. So at my role at Klaviyo, I do kind of like a lot of different things oftentimes. So like I'm technically working on the engineering team, but I work with the go-to-market team, I work with the CSM team, I work with support, I work with pretty much data science, like pretty much all aspects of the company. And part of that is being go-to-market and trying to like land big deals. I would have to schedule impromptu meetings where I like showed up at people's desk, and it was like our head of product management or someone, and I had to like convince them to do something they weren't going to be wanting to do at first. And having to have a lot of difficult conversations like that are way easier in person. It's like so much easier cross-departmentally to like go and find people and emphasize with them and convince them to agree to something that they probably wouldn't have wanted to agree to if you just slacked them or just asked them casually without like a ton of context behind it and like a really good reason. So we've had to adjust things like that. You have to just know, like, right, certain things that require that intimate level of communication just aren't going to work anymore. And that's not to say that like it's impossible for all companies to do that, but I think that like that level of collaboration where like you have 4 or 5 different people from 4 or 5 different departments, 4 or 5 different teams, all together for 30 minutes, getting a ton done just doesn't exist right now. So it's going to take longer. You have to be more patient.
Yeah.
You have to emphasize with people. People have kids at home. People have a lot of shit going on now. So like you just have to be willing to let things take a little longer and focus on the most important things. Maybe you're going to drop some of the peripheral things you can't do as much and that take a lot of communication between people. Focus on the high notes, and if something seems like it's going to be too difficult because of this, just drop it completely.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
Yeah, patience is key right now, I think, as all of us are experiencing these challenging times. And like Jonas said, some formality is just going out the window, and you know what, just let it. Some of that just really doesn't matter at the end of the day. As long as customers are happy, we're doing our best. That's really what's most important. Erica or Jonas, do you have any last comments about navigating challenges during COVID or anything else, I suppose, customer success related?
Go ahead. Okay. I think we're particularly fortunate. I mean, working at a B2B SaaS company, not too much has changed. Our work is online and folks are still doing the work that we're building software to support. But definitely in the sales process, there was, an impact. I think financial insecurity impacting companies was, significant. And I think that, thankfully it seems to have been rebounding, but there was a period where, as an early stage startup trying to gain traction, running into these conversations with folks who were already in the sales pipeline, who, decided that it wasn't the right time due to the financial insecurity was definitely a tough blow. But it did really allow us from a product standpoint to focus on our longer term vision and build out the product in the past 6 months, the Parler product that it is today. And we think it's a lot more in line with our long-term goal. And so without having to worry about, one-off customizations to close a deal, or, having to try and track down folks in our sales process, we focused on our product. And I think, we're able to come out on top, thankfully. But I don't know if that is really a great answer, but that's just our COVID impact at Parler.
Yeah, thank you. And Erica?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the internal challenges that David described, we're experiencing some of the same ones. The one tip I would give folks on that piece is that just think about how you do asynchronous communication, because folks have, kids in school and, like life and work is blending now. I heard someone say the other day, it's not that we're working from home, it's that we're living at work. And so it was really depressing actually to hear that, but
bummer
for me. But thinking about like, how do people access information on their own time, I think is really important. Sometimes Slack can just be this continuous wave of over communication and things can get lost really easily. The other thing I'll say is that for us, since we deal with e-commerce merchants, this is both something that's been a benefit and a challenge, is that a lot of brick and mortar stores suddenly had to go e-commerce, right? And so you have a lot of folks who are suddenly having to build stores and do things in a way that they are unaccustomed to doing. And so we're absorbing a lot of that stress and a lot of that, they're just wondering like what to do next. And so providing that direction and just being that soft place to land for our customers has been really important to helping them through COVID as well.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say one final thing. Sorry, I know we're way over time. There was a question we didn't get to on balancing services and software. Don't do services.
There you go. There's your last tip from the panel here. But awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. This was great. I hope you guys all learned a lot. I know I did. This was fabulous. So thank you to the panelists. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pardis, who's going to close us out.